David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Senators are supposed to be jurors in the impeachment of a president. And we learned that yesterday, 21 Republican senators, 21 of the 53, that's nearly 40% of the Republican senators, left the Senate chamber for long periods of time while Adam Schiff was arguing the case of the prosecution during yesterday's day of Donald Trump's Senate impeachment trial. Senators are supposed to be in their seats during the trial. They're supposed to not miss the proceedings, since these proceedings are what they will ultimately be using to decide, are we going to convict or are we going to acquit the president of the United States? And yet 21 Republican senators and 2 Democratic senators were missing while Adam Schiff was laying out the case. They're not even pretending to take this seriously. And of course, we know they're not taking it seriously. We know they've already decided that they will be voting to acquit the president of the United States, but they could at least pretend to take it seriously. Michael McAuliffe, who's a congressional reporter, tweeted about this in the middle of the day yesterday, saying, quote, just counted 21 empty seats on the Republican side of the Senate, 2 on the Democratic side, a couple of hours into Adam Schiff's presentation. Some are just stretching their legs, but most are not in the chamber. Some of them have been out of there for a while. They're supposed to decide the fate of Donald Trump based on the evidence, and they are missing the evidence. And we talked on yesterday's live stream of the proceedings about how Chief Justice John Roberts, who's presiding over impeachment as the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, does. John Roberts' role is procedural. It is not to evaluate the evidence or render an opinion. Part of the procedure that John Roberts is supposed to be enforcing are the basic rules, like senators must be there during the proceedings. And this actually may be part of why we only get 2 camera angles the entire time. C-SPAN has said they've requested to be allowed to use their cameras in the Senate and to control their cameras. Mitch McConnell does not want that. And when you look at the production of the stream, unless something's changed in the last few hours, there's a shot of the outside of the Senate, which I believe is still a C-SPAN camera. And then there are 2 shots. We get 2 camera angles. There's like a zoomed in shot of the area where Schiff and Nadler and the different House managers, impeachment managers stand. And then there's a slightly wider shot that lets you see the front of the room, the tables where Donald Trump's defense attorneys and the House impeachment managers and John Roberts are pictured, but no real shots of the chamber, since we would all immediately realize, where the hell are the senators? This is sick and disgusting, and it is a sham. Republicans have been saying this is a sham. They're right, it's a sham. But it's a sham because 40% of them are gone for long portions of Adam Schiff's and other presentations. In a sense, it's almost as if there are 53 empty seats, right? Because they're all, as far as we know, going to vote to acquit Donald Trump regardless of the evidence. And like I said yesterday on Twitter, how will they decide whether to convict or acquit Trump if they don't see the testimony? Oh, that's right. They don't need to. It's an absolute and total farce. We're doomed in a sense here. And this is not even really a matter of partisanship per se. It's just childish behavior. It's immature elected officials. It's with a lot of them, we keep hearing it. This is boring. And it's boring, but you are deciding about whether a president who is only the 3rd president ever to be impeached is going to become the 1st president ever to actually be convicted on impeachment. And they're bored. They're bored and they're walking around while Adam Schiff is presenting evidence. It's a truly sorry bunch. And because of the coverage on Fox News and elsewhere, which I'm going to talk about momentarily, a huge portion of the country will not even hear that 40% of Republicans were gone during much of Adam Schiff's speech. It won't even enter their echo chamber at all, ever. But it reinforces, once again, for better or worse, our voicemail today argues that this is for worse. Every day of this reinforces that there's one way to hold Donald Trump accountable. I don't even have to say it. We all know what it is, and it would be done in November. Let me just put it that way. It's 9.5 months away. He won't be convicted on impeachment. He's not going to be indicted criminally after he's out of office. Yesterday, I got questions during our live stream about how likely do you think it is Trump gets indicted when he finally leaves office. I don't think it's likely at all. I would not take that bet. We have one shot to force him to suffer a consequence, and it's by voting him out in November. Let's now talk about Fox News' coverage. Fox News is doing something that is evil genius. I have to hand it to them. It's actually genius what they are doing. If Fox News were to say, we're not going to talk about the impeachment trial, we're not going to show that there is an impeachment trial going on, they would rightly be called out because that would be completely absurd. We've had 3 presidents impeached in the history of the United States. Andrew Johnson was in the 19th century before we had 24-hour news and the internet and satellite television and all of this stuff. The other was Bill Clinton in the 1990s. And now we have Donald Trump. Not covering impeachment would be crazy. Even for Fox News, they would be called out. It would not be something that they would be able to bear. So Fox News has figured out a way to have impeachment on the TV screen, but not to really cover it and to propagandize directly through the impeachment proceedings. Yesterday, the impeachment managers, the prosecutors, as they effectively are in the impeachment of Donald Trump, they had their first 3 days of presenting their case. It was long. It was nearly 8 of their 24 hours that they have allocated for this. It was very nuanced and detailed, and there were exhibits, videos, tweets, text messages. But Adam Schiff and the others did a very good job of laying out the big picture of Donald Trump's wrongdoing, starting to sort of lay out the arc of it. Fox News often showed it on mute, meaning without audio, including going to commercials while impeachment was going on. And they can say, we covered it. If you turned on Fox News, there were hours and hours where you could see that impeachment proceedings were going on. You couldn't hear it. It was on the screen, though. You couldn't hear what was being said. They ran commercials. Later, they ran right-wing commentary, lying about the content of the proceedings, while you could see but not hear the proceedings. So let's look at a few clips. I have a bunch of these. Here's a commercial for some kind of bed linen or pillow or something when Adam Schiff is speaking about how the president committed high crimes and misdemeanors and should be removed from office.
Each and every one of you get the best sleep of your life. That's why I created my new Giza Dreams bed sheets. I guarantee you they'll be the most comfortable sheets you'll ever own.
Now, every network has commercials. That by itself is not a huge thing, but this was all day. Here's another example of when Congresswoman Val Demings was laying out her part of the narrative. And as Aaron Rupar said on Twitter, Fox has the optics of covering the impeachment trial without really covering it. They show the proceedings with no audio while the hosts provide Trumpian spin. Here's Jesse Watters saying they should call Hunter Biden to the trial.
You get to call whoever you want. And one of the reasons you call Hunter is ask him what the hell he was doing over there and why he was doing it. Because that's why he was making that phone call partially.
And the Wall Street Journal mentioned this in an editorial, that if you're arguing there was a corrupt motive that Trump have, then and if he was investigating Hunter Biden's activities, well, let's explore that. And let's explore what Hunter Biden told his father, the vice president, about his business in Ukraine. Let's ask Obama energy czar Amos Hochstein, who raised concerns about Joe Biden and his aides, about Hunter Biden's Ukrainian ties. And then there was Chris Hines, former Secretary of State John Kerry's stepson, broke business with Hunter Biden because of his work with Burisma. He called it unacceptable. So let's cover all that just really quickly.
Hey, they covered it, right? I mean, you couldn't hear a damn word that was said. You could only hear pro-Trump spin and conspiracy theories, but it was on the screen. You could see Val Demings moving her mouth there. Then at night, mind you, this was still while the proceedings were going on because they went from about 1 to nearly 9:45 p.m. Eastern time. Sean Hannity, instead of showing you what Adam Schiff is saying, sums up the proceedings as we learned nothing at all, and there's nothing notable here, and Adam Schiff looked like a crazy person. Manufacturing consent, telling you what to think after a full day of telling you what to think.
Here's what you missed from today's Schumer Schiff Sham Show charade. Made it again. We learned absolutely nothing new today, not one new piece of information. Instead, we got hours and hours and hours, literally, of the compromised, corrupt, congenital liar, Adam Schiff. Wow. Never-ending, nonstop, feigned moral outrage.
And then here's Tucker Carlson also. Again, the proceedings were still going on, just ridiculing the entire thing.
right there. The Senate impeachment trial is still going. It's been in progress all day. You'll be forgiven if you didn't watch every single minute of it. Imagine a movie written and directed by children whose ending you already know. And by the way, it's 20 hours long in Hungarian with misspelled subtitles. That's what it's like. We've been monitoring it anyway all day because that's what we do. And we'll alert you if anything interesting happens during this hour.
So understand, you could watch Fox News all day, and in some technical sense, you'd be watching the impeachment trial, except you would have heard commercials for MyPillow instead of Adam Schiff. You would have heard Jesse Watters and Deegan McPowell talk about we got to get Hunter Biden to testify, as if that's what this is really about. And then you would be able to finish out the day with Tucker Carlson and Sean Hannity spoon feeding you that you didn't miss anything. All the impeachment managers are making fools out of themselves, and there's nothing to see here whatsoever. These are full-on propaganda tactics, okay? This is how you end up with people who say Trump did nothing wrong. Did you watch the trial, though? You would say to them, and they'd say, you know, I did. I watched the trial. But did you hear anything that they said, or did you see Adam Schiff's mouth moving while Tucker Carlson and Sean Hannity told you there was actually nothing to see here? Well, no, I guess I watched it, but I didn't really hear anything. But Trump definitely did nothing wrong. It's a very sad state of affairs. And it's part of reinforcing when Republicans ultimately vote to acquit, everybody will feel, Trumpists, I mean, that they did the right thing. A Fox News viewer, on the day that the acquittal of Donald Trump happens, they will hear Trump was acquitted, and they will think back to, you know, I remember watching on Fox News, and I didn't hear anything damning about Donald Trump during the trial. Well, Fox ran it on mute while their commentators told you that there was nothing to see here. And then they'll think, yeah, the Republicans voted the right way because I don't remember hearing anything very damning about what Donald Trump did. Manufacturing consent. It's out of a textbook. And the story of how right-wing media is handling this is a huge part of the story. And when the history of this is written, I hope that's included. With Andrew Johnson's impeachment, of course, the technology wasn't there to manufacture consent in this way. With Bill Clinton's impeachment, well, that was the impeachment of a Democrat. So the rules are completely different when it comes to how right-wing media will cover it. And of course, we didn't have social media then like we do now. This is a huge event for the United States of America in and of itself. But the manufacturing of consent, the media narratives, the spin are a huge part of it. And we can't forget that. Let me know what you think about how Fox News has been covering this. I'm on Twitter at @dpacman. Follow me on Twitter at @dpacman. And let me know what you make of how the right has been covering the impeachment of Donald Trump.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Today's new members of the day are James Beaudry and Lucas Skagilis. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. James and Lucas, thanks for your support. I also want to say thanks to Melissa Powers. Melissa's today's longtime sustaining member of the day. We are celebrating the impeachment trial of Donald Trump with the coupon code IMPEACH50. 103 people so far have taken advantage of that coupon code, which will save you 50%, IMPEACH50. Take advantage yourself at www.joinpakman.com. A lot of discussion on the David Pakman Show subreddit about the Democratic primary, including Hillary Clinton's recent comments about Bernie Sanders. Remember, find the subreddit at davidpakman.com/REDDIT. Nearly 17,000 of our viewers and listeners currently subscribed to the subreddit. A few interesting posts. Blue Rice posted, "Will Hillary's attack on Bernie backfire?" Referring to Hillary Clinton saying recently that nobody likes Bernie Sanders. The post says, I am rooting for Bernie or Warren to win the nomination, much like David. Australia desperately needs progressive leaders in light of the bushfires, and I think a progressive president would help shift the world's population to that kind of thinking. Having said that, I'm not optimistic about Bernie or Warren's chances, but I want to see what effect Hillary's attack on Bernie will have, if any. My question is, does Hillary exemplify the mainstream politics that the U.S. seemed to reject in 2016 when not considering the popular vote more than Biden does? If it continues to be publicized, could Hillary's attack paint Bernie as more of an anti-establishment choice and invigorate a different section of Democratic voters? Or is Bernie already seen as an anti-establishment candidate amongst U.S. voters? I believe Bernie is already very clearly seen as an anti-establishment candidate, sometimes to a fault in the sense that he is couched as this outrageous radical who wants to tear down all of the basic infrastructure systems we have, which isn't true. He's just a social democrat in the sort of Northern European sense. But I do believe that Hillary Clinton's attack could backfire. The thing is, the backfire, there's 2 degrees. The first is, could it backfire and get Bernie the nomination? Question 2 is, what would happen if Bernie is the nominee to the chances of removing Donald Trump? And fortunately for all of us, we have new polling about that, which we will be talking about a little bit later today. Another post on the subreddit from a user who goes by the name Pedantically Semantic says, is David wrong about calling Bernie's label of democratic socialism inaccurate? Adding that there does seem to be an overlap in semantics, meaning if the definition of socialism is the public ownership of the means of production, and the public is not specifically stated as only the government, and the public can also mean a collective of the public like cooperatives, and capitalism is defined as the private ownership, and private can mean an individual can own. So as you can see, this is a very semantically intense question. I want to just answer it from the top level, which is, as we've addressed before, if democratic socialism now is being understood to mean social democracy, isn't it true that Bernie is a democratic socialist if what we mean by democratic socialist is just social democrat? I don't even think we need to have that conversation. The conversation that I've had is that when socialism is discussed in many circles, the actual definition is still used. And so for clarity, I believe it makes more sense for Bernie to say that he is running a candidacy on social democracy, not democratic socialism. I concede that over time in society, if we start using a different word for something, or if we change the definition of a word, these are things we can determine, and that may be the case. I don't believe we've gotten to that point, and I think that there is only more confusion, not less, when Bernie Sanders is called a democratic socialist, even though the policies are the policies of social democracy. People can disagree about this. That's my view as of right now. Join the discussion at davidpakman.com/Reddit. Things can change very quickly as we close in on the first votes being cast in the 2020 Democratic primary. Just look at the last 24 hours, which have been very good for Senator Bernie Sanders. Yesterday, I told you, 24 hours ago, I told you that Joe Biden had picked up some support both nationally and in Iowa in recent polls. The good news came in a big wave over the last 24 hours for Bernie Sanders, and let's go through it. We have a new national poll, a new California poll, and a new hypothetical matchups poll against Donald Trump to look at. Let's go through them one at a time. Starting with the national poll, the big story, a new CNN poll has Bernie leading nationally. The poll says Bernie 27, Joe Biden 24. There's a 3.5-point margin of error. So technically it could be tied, but again, a shift in momentum in the direction of Bernie Sanders. In this same poll, Elizabeth Warren is polling just 14. If we are to believe recent polls, we really have a 2-candidate race right now. This is really Biden and Bernie. One of them will be the nominee. If we can believe recent polls, if recent polls can be trusted, Elizabeth Warren is all but out of this thing, not polling in second place anywhere unless you go all the way back to an IBD poll that is like 15 or 20 polls old at this point in time. We'll get to more of that in a second. Next, new polling out of California, where in a University of Southern California Rossier School of Education poll, that's a mouthful, Bernie is leading, Bernie 28, Biden 24. Now, what's important to understand about California is a huge state population-wise, many delegates to be had from California, but very unlikely that California will be a difference maker in the primary. I'll explain why. California apportions delegates in proportion to the percentage of the vote that different candidates get. So if Bernie beats Biden 28-24, they get a very similar number of delegates out of California, 28 and 24%, respectively. If the numbers are flipped, it's still a very similar number of delegates for the two of them. So California is important momentum-wise. It's a huge state, and for PR purposes, it's important. But understand that, in 2016, Bernie lost the California primary to Hillary Clinton, but he had like 46% of the vote and got roughly 46% of the delegates. This time, because it's a bigger field, Bernie may win, but actually end up with fewer delegates than he did in 2016. But that's for the future. Once the first four primaries are out of the way, we'll look at California in more detail. And then third, and maybe most interestingly, we have another one of these hypothetical matchup polls where people are said, if the nominee were Bernie, how would you vote on Trump versus Bernie? If the nominee were Biden, how would you vote on Trump versus Biden? And the results are compelling. This is from Survey USA, consisting of more than 4,000 registered voters. The numbers are fascinating. The person with the biggest lead over Trump is Bernard Sanders, 52-43, Trump -9 against Bernie. Biden is defeating Trump by 7 in the hypothetical matchup. Bloomberg leading Trump by 6. Warren leading Trump by 3. Buttigieg leading Trump by 3, but with more undecideds. Andrew Yang leading Trump by 2. Even Tom Steyer is even with Trump. The two candidates that lose to Trump in the hypothetical matchups, Amy Klobuchar and Tulsi Gabbard, losing by the most, Trump ahead of Tulsi by 5, which will anger a small but loud portion of my audience. So what's the takeaway? Knowing that the establishment is going to run a full court press for Joe Biden throughout the primary, what this tells us is we've got a real race here, and the race is Biden versus Bernie. When it comes to facing Trump, Bernie is regularly doing the best against Trump compared to other candidates. That shouldn't be ignored when we think about electability. Unless someone can explain to me how Warren is still in this thing, I don't see her having a path to the nomination. So my question to you is, can we now say that this is almost completely a two-candidate race, Biden versus Bernie, or do you still see Warren or anybody else having a path to the nomination? I also can't restate the importance enough that we want to have a primary that doesn't hurt our chances of removing Donald Trump. So yesterday I talked about Hillary Clinton's comment that nobody likes Bernie and her hesitation to say she would support Bernie if he is the nominee. That's the self-destructive garbage that is the last thing we need, the absolutely last thing we need right now. Let's get out there. Let's support the people we like based on their policies. Let's vote. Let's then rally around the removal of Donald Trump. A very solid couple of days for Bernie Sanders. Reminder, my question to you, is Warren still in this thing? She seems to be out to me, but I want to hear from you. We will continue our coverage of this on our Instagram page. Make sure you're following The David Pakman Show on Instagram at David Pakman Show. While you're there, follow me at david.pakman.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
It's great to welcome to the program Sean McFate, who is Senior Fellow at the Atlantic Council and also author most recently of The New Rules of War, Victory in the Age of Durable Disaster. Sean, it's so great to have you back.
Great to be back with you, Dave.
So we've been following a lot of different geopolitical and also sort of military-related stories. We had what looked like it was heading in the direction of a big escalation with Iran that did not happen. We've been talking about the possible different paths that the future of the three big superpowers, the U.S., China, and Russia, could potentially take. And in that context, talking about technology, militaries, China's declining birth rate, and all of these different factors that could play a role. If you just were to big picture for us the changes that we've seen to the dynamics of the superpowers over the last couple of years under Donald Trump, what has changed, I guess, is maybe where to start.
Well, the first thing is that Donald Trump is really doubling down on the defense budget. The U.S. military budget is bigger than the next 7 biggest militaries in the world combined. It's sort of like the Ronald Reagan buildup. And I think in some ways, and there's a shift away from terrorism to great power competition like Russia and China, Iran. And in some ways that's smart. But what's not smart is what we're investing in and how we think we're going to fight those wars if it becomes a war.
Can you give some examples of that in the sense that, I mean, I think we've talked about how whenever there is a discussion of a possible war now, our minds probably still go to the type of warfare of times past, and that's not realistically what it would look like. But what would it look like? What would the sort of battle lines be?
So in the old rules of war, the way you won war is battlefield victory. Think of Waterloo, Gettysburg, Stalingrad, Midway. But when was the last time battlefield victory swayed a war in the last 70 years? No times. So warfare has changed. We think in terms of conventional war. We think that the future war is going to be like World War II with better technology. But in fact, where war has gone to is strategic deception. And what matters now is wars became epistemological. So what matters now is not like battlefield victory. It matters what people and populations think. So what does victory look like now? Well, let me ask you a question. I mean, like right now we're engaged in a cultural war in the United States of America, right? Fox versus CNN, Democrats versus Republicans, all those things. Now we know that democracies are messy, and it's okay if we're having an organic family dispute. What's not okay is if foreign powers are finding the fissures in our society and fanning those flames deliberately. And that's indeed what's going on. It's a form of warfare. It's not something that F-35s can fight.
Is it so I understand what you're saying. Still though, so let me give you a counterexample and see where you think it fits in. In the discussion of a possible escalation with Iran, we saw some pretty good pieces that said from a strategy and tactics perspective, Iran will be very different than Iraq. Iran's military is much stronger than Iraq's. The land, the sort of geographical realities of Iran are very different than Iraq, mountainous and very different. Those seem like analyses more related to the sort of traditional battlefield, and they seem relevant. Are they partially relevant? Are they relevant in a different way? Or is that not even a reasonable analysis to be making?
It's not a reasonable analysis at all.
Really?
I mean, no. I mean, to invade Iran would be like to invade China or to invade Moscow. You know, both Napoleon and the Nazis learned not to invade Russia. Just because you have more troops and more bullets does not mean you're going to win wars. So what's going on? Let's look at Iran. What's going on in Iran right now? Well, we know that Iran and Russia in the last 10 years have really come to dominate Middle East politics. We kind of lost, and Russia is filling the void, and so is Iran. And the way they're fighting is not like the Iraq-Iran war of days of old. They're using secret type of weapons, using they're using the Quds special forces, Hezbollah, terrorist proxy groups, propaganda, all these things. And you know what? So does Russia. They use Spetsnaz, they use mercenaries like the Wagner Group, they use Little Green Men, they use these fake proxy militias, they use propaganda and active measures. That's how they took the Crimea, right? And this is also how Iran has taken the Levant, how they've taken Syria. And they're doing it not through troops on the ground and tanks and mountainous, they're doing it through deception. And the reason is that we live in an information age where weapons that give you plausible deniability, like terrorists and special forces and propaganda, weapons that give you plausible deniability are more potent than firepower. We in the US are still focusing on firepower, but warfare has completely changed. Iran and Russia fight this way. We do not.
So let's keep talking about firepower a little bit then. Nuclear weapons.
Yeah.
A lot of the conversation around Iran stemmed from the 2015 Iran nuclear deal, which, as far as we knew at the time that Donald Trump decided to bail on it, Iran was abiding by. Of course, since then, Iran has now said, well, if the U.S. is out, we're not going to abide by it anymore. Can you talk a little bit about, in the new sort of framework of what war would look like, what role do nuclear weapons have? Because often the conversation is merely about, if the U.S. gets to have them, who are we to say Iran doesn't? The legitimacy of the UN Security Council. That's often the conversation. I got a caller a couple of weeks ago who said, David, what's not being discussed is it's possible that Iran getting nuclear weapons could be a moderating influence, in the sense that sometimes once countries have nuclear weapons, they see themselves as part of a sort of different tier or echelon, and it can actually tone down radical rhetoric. What do you think about that? Where do you come down on the role of nuclear weapons in new warfare?
It's a great question. First of all, the JCPOA is on hospice care. It's done. And we also know that Russia is working behind the scenes of the UN to let the arms embargo on Iran expire, so that come October we can see, Iran and Russia really doubling down on conventional weapons. In terms of nuclear weapons, WMD, it's probably inevitable that Iran at some point will get a nuclear weapon. We can bomb Natanz with we'll take a nuclear weapon, maybe a JDAM to hit it. That will slow it down. We could also try to assassinate their scientists, as Israel has done. That can slow it down. But I think we have to be prepared to live in a world that may have a nuclear Iran. And if they do, we have to ask ourselves, are they really going to deploy it? I mean, everybody assumes they're going to deploy it, and I don't know if that's true. People said this about North Korea before North Korea became nuclear. And in fact, once Iran is a nuclear power, we still have levers of power, levers of diplomacy we can pull on them. It's not Armageddon, despite their fierce rhetoric. I'm not being an apologist for Iran, but there are people who treat it like the moment they get a nuclear weapon is the moment, Tel Aviv and New York City go up in a mushroom cloud. And I think some of that is just fear-mongering.
Well, there's no question that the use of a nuclear weapon would be self-destructive. There's no question about that. But I guess the broader question is, when it comes to policy, would the presence of or the more serious potential to have a nuclear weapon make that country perceived as more important to negotiate with? I mean, there are examples from history. We can look at Iran. We can look at, within the Soviet Union, instances where there has been disarming, where there have been agreements to disarm, that the future has not gone particularly well for some of those countries. So if you look at history, it's understandable why countries would see nuclear weapons, or at least the serious potential of them, as a good negotiating tool or something that's good to have. That's right. I mean, look at North Korea. They were treated as a B-list player at best before they got nuclear weapons. Now people pay attention to them when they speak, and they're not going to give up on nuclear weapons despite whatever the Trump administration promises. Look at Ukraine. They gave up their nuclear weapons after the Soviet Union collapsed. The United States promised them, we'll protect you if Russia ever gets aggressive. And then when Russia got aggressive in 2014, the U.S. broke its promise. So I think the entire world knows that it's better to have nuclear weapons than not, and it shouldn't just go to the victors of World War II. I think the danger is a nuclear World War I Sarajevo moment. If Iran ever gets a nuclear weapon, we know Israel has nuclear weapons, and many believe that Saudi Arabia has a secret deal with Pakistan. Saudi Arabia used to have a nuclear program in the 70s, 80s, and the U.S., talked them out of it. But some believe that Saudis made a secret deal with Pakistan, giving them all their research and all their money, and said, you develop nuclear weapons, and if we ever need one, we'll just secretly buy a dozen from you. And so very quickly, we could have a nuclear Iran, Saudi Arabia, Israel, and there's a threat of accidental war, like a 1914 Sarajevo moment, but it doesn't last 4 years, it lasts, 30 minutes. And that would be tragic. What do you see as the role of organizations like the United Nations? We've talked about NATO a lot since Donald Trump has been president, and shared defense treaties. There's this streak of both. I mean, it starts with nationalism, but it often leads to a sort of isolationism in some cases. What do you see as the role of multinational organizations, joint defense treaties, et cetera, in the next 10 to 15 years?
It's a great question. I mean, first of all, the question about NATO is long overdue, and Donald Trump's not the first person to ask what's their mission, right? That's hardly new. I do think that international organizations like the United Nations have passed their expiration date. They have failed to evolve with the world. Right now, we're in a world where, it's not the world that we imagine, the world diplomats imagine is state-centric. States are everything, and everything that's not state is called sub-state politics. But we live in a world where the Fortune 500 are more powerful than most states, where the super, uber, duper rich, the 0.1% globally, are more powerful than the most states, and where mercenaries are back. So anybody who's rich enough can go to war for any reason they want. That means anybody can swipe a paycheck, can become a superpower eventually. ExxonMobil gets its own army. Bill Gates gets his own army. Mega churches, oligarchs, they all get their own militaries. So the UN is still stuck in the state-centric worldview. And they're not likely to leave that. And so is international law, which is why they become less and less relevant for mitigating and managing conflicts around the world, whether that's Rwanda or the Congo or Iraq or Afghanistan. At most, they're just a rubber stamp. They're stationary at most. And I think they either have to evolve, or they're just going to become lip service.
What would the evolution of an organization like NATO look like?
Of NATO, I think that NATO is. I think NATO's past its expiration date, because after the Cold War, it stopped becoming a military alliance, became a pro-democracy alliance, and now it's kind of run half by diplomatic think and half by military think. If there's going to be a real alliance, a collective security alliance, look at what Poland is doing on the east. So Eastern Europe, they take Russia's threat very seriously, and they're kind of forming an informal security cooperation pact. And I think something like that might be more of a model. But it needs to be, NATO would have to be once and again seized with defense as its primary mission, and not being used as a tool for human rights and democracy. As important as those things are, that's not the original nature of a defense alliance.
We've been speaking with Sean McFate, who is a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council, also author most recently of the book, The New Rules of War, Victory in the Age of Durable Disaster. Sean, so great having you on today.
Thank you, David. It's great to be back on your show.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
If you watched Donald Trump's impeachment trial day 3 yesterday on Fox News, you might not have heard much about this because they ran a lot of the proceedings on mute, running My Pillow commercials over the impeachment proceedings. Or you had hosts talking over the proceedings, talking about how Hunter Biden is really what this impeachment trial should be about. But that did not stop Donald Trump from absolutely losing his mind and tweeting a record for him 141 times in one day. That was only up until 6 p.m. And then it continued. I've told you before, when Donald Trump seemingly spends the entire day doing nothing but tweeting, sometimes dozens of tweets. Once I think he got into the 80s or 90s. We didn't see that much Twitter activity from Donald Trump on Tuesday, but I'm now realizing that was because he was still at the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland, and then traveling back eventually. Yesterday, he had more time back in Washington, D.C., and I think sitting on Air Force One, and he broke his own personal record for tweets and retweets in a single day, tweeting 141 times by 6 p.m. Eastern, continuing into the night and this morning. Most of the tweets are either tweets or retweets of extremist Republican quotes videos and statements, sometimes just absolute nonsense conspiracy theories from Donald Trump. The tweets include Trump's and his friends' attacks on the House impeachment managers, who sort of are the prosecutors in the impeachment trial, including, of course, a favorite target of Trump's is extreme anger at Adam Schiff. Trump this morning, including a mostly capitalized tirade. Of course, a hallmark of Trumpist tweets, both Trump and his supporters are, when you get set up to tweet, you turn caps lock on and you turn spell check off. That's how, if you're getting yourself set up to tweet Trumpist stuff, you've got to disable spell check and enable caps lock. This morning, Donald Trump saying, attorney generals, it's attorneys general. I know that. Trump doesn't. Attorney generals from 21 states are urging the Senate to reject capital I impeachment. They say the articles have legal and factual problems, and the Democrats' case sets a dangerous historical precedent, missing an apostrophe, random capitalization, and then now caps lock engaged. Buckle in, folks. All caps. Even an unsuccessful effort to impeach the president undermines the integrity of the 2020 election because it weaponizes a process that should only be initiated in exceedingly rare circumstances and should never be used for partisan purposes. The Democrats are trying hard to damage Republicans prior to the capital E election. I'm sweating now. Here's what you need to understand. 141 tweets by 6 p.m. If he started at midnight, that's 18 hours, okay? 141 tweets in 18 hours is 8 tweets per hour. That's 1 tweet every 7.5 minutes. But that's if he's not sleeping at all and just tweeting for 18 hours straight. If we assume that Trump tweeted 141 times, starting at, 5 a.m. maybe, which sounds insane to you or I, but to you or me. Between 5 a.m. and 6 p.m., 141 tweets. That's 11 tweets per hour, meaning a tweet every 5.5 minutes. It's the president of the United States. He's sending out a tweet or retweet every 5 minutes for an entire workday. This amount of tweeting isn't normal for anyone. If I look at my Twitter feed and I see someone @messaged me 5 times in an hour, I immediately mute them. I don't have time for this nonsense. Trump is tweeting 141 times in a day. And it's funny in a way to see him so triggered on Twitter. It is funny to see Donald Trump at these world events like Davos as the guy none of the other world leaders really want to talk to. The idea of the adults are meeting about important things and Trump is on his phone tweeting. That's a hilarious image, but it's really bad. It's an embarrassment. It's a laughingstock for the United States. I don't even have time to read 141 tweets in a day. And Donald Trump is sending out 141 tweets and retweets. I expect that this is going to get even worse once the Republicans take over their defense of Donald Trump in the Senate. And the reason why is that a lot of Donald Trump's Twitter activity is retweeting videos that are people saying nice things about him or defending him. Once his lawyers, Pat Cipollone and Jay Sekulow, once they take over, I think Donald Trump could potentially even break his own record of 141 tweets and retweets in a single day. Speaking of Donald Trump at Davos, Donald Trump has targeted a 17-year-old kid in a completely incoherent tirade at the Davos World Economic Forum in Switzerland. I happen to be talking about 17-year-old Swedish climate activist Greta Thunberg. Donald Trump included in his screed that she, quote, barely beat him out to be on the cover of Time magazine. The president of the United States, a 73-year-old billionaire, is attacking a 17-year-old autistic kid who just wants to save the planet. This is where we are in 2020. It's sick. It's disgusting. But we're sort of used to the fact that this is where we are. And the reality is it's going to continue if and until this guy is removed in November of 2020, ultimately leaving office in January of 2021. Donald Trump also maybe even more disturbingly said that Greta Thunberg should really focus on the pollution of other countries because the United States is doing fine, which is a crazy thing to say. Let's take a look at the clip and then discuss.
You're doing enough.
How old is she?
She's 17 now.
Oh,
yes.
That's good.
But What is your response to her?
She beat me out on Time Magazine.
But did you hear from other world leaders and business leaders who said that they think that she has a message?
No, I didn't, actually. But I would have loved to have seen her speak. I did not. No, not at all. I think aspects of it are, I think that some people they put it at a level that is, unrealistic to a point you can't live your lives. We want to have the cleanest water on earth. We want to have the cleanest air on earth. Our numbers, as you saw, we had record numbers come out very recently. Our numbers are very, very good. Our environmental numbers, our water numbers, our numbers on air are tremendous. We have to do something about other continents. We have to do something about other countries. When we're clean and beautiful and everything's good, but you have another continent where the fumes are rising at levels that you can't believe. I mean, I think Greta ought to focus on those places, but we are doing better right now than we've ever done in terms of cleanliness, in terms of numbers. We have a beautiful ocean called the Pacific Ocean, where thousands and thousands of tons of garbage flows toward us, and that's put there by other countries. So I think Greta has to start working on those other countries.
So just the fact that he's attacking a kid is insane, that he's obsessed with Greta Thunberg, it's very, very weird. And in fact, I've previously spoken about how it's bizarre how easily and totally triggered the right is by Greta Thunberg. It's not just Trump. It's a kid who wants to save the planet and who speaks in a way that it inspires a lot of people to take seriously this issue of the climate and pollution and climate change. And so many Republicans are just so instantly triggered by Greta Thunberg. But then Donald Trump said, the U.S. is clean and beautiful, and Greta should be focusing elsewhere. That's wrong. The United States is a huge, disproportionate polluter and user of fossil fuels on a per capita basis. It's the opposite of what Donald Trump says in reality. There are many countries that pollute. The United States on a per capita basis disproportionately does so, but it shouldn't really come as a surprise that Donald Trump is spreading misinformation on this issue, because he did say climate change is a hoax created by the Chinese to bolster their manufacturing industry. Trump lost out to a teenager who wants to save the planet for being on the cover of Time magazine, and he's furious, and he's taking it out of her. Nice little presidency we have here, not embarrassing at all. And then I remembered Melania Trump, Donald Trump's wife. One of her issues was being against bullying. When she was asked, what are the key issues going to be? Michelle Obama, nutrition and the White House garden and vegetables, and, was a very prominent issue for Michelle Obama. For Melania, it was going to be bullying. She doesn't like bullying. Her husband is bullying a child. Her husband is bullying a child who's doing something good, I think it's important to add. But don't even dare mention Barron Trump's name, by the way. That would be completely and totally off limits. Even saying his name is not allowed. The reality around the world at a global level is that this 17-year-old kid, 17-year-old Greta Thunberg, at the global level is more respected than Donald Trump. And Trump, on some level, probably perceives that. People react more positively to Greta Thunberg than to him when she walks in the room, compared to when he walks in the room, unless it's a hand-picked crowd at a sycophantic rally, and he can't take it, and he's attacking a kid again. It's truly incredible. We have a voicemail number. That number is 219-2-DAVID-P. This voicemail is very timely in the context of impeachment, in the context of what we expect to be an acquittal of Donald Trump along party lines in the Senate. Let's take a listen.
Hey, David. Name's Landon Letterman from East Tennessee.
Hey, Landon.
I just had a question about impeachment and all this. Is that, I'm not to underplay the importance of voting, but if voting is the only means of dealing with a corrupt president,
yes,
in terms of the way Donald Trump has lived his life at all,
right,
then why do we have a system of justice?
Good question.
It just seems pointless to me that that's the only recourse. Get back to me on this.
Yeah, no, Landon, you're completely right. I mean, this is what I've been saying for a while. The Mueller investigation was never going to remove Donald Trump. Go back and look at my videos from, I don't even know, April of 2017. I said, if you're waiting around for this to remove Trump, it's not going to. The 25th Amendment possibility, the cabinet, if you're waiting around, this is clearly a guy who's impaired, either in a medical sense or in a colloquial sense. It's not going to work. Impeachment. We know it's not going to remove Donald Trump. The emoluments violation, it's not going to remove Donald Trump. So the question Landon is asking is one we all have to contend with, which is, are our systems of checks and balances too much subject to the whims of the party that is in control of them? I think the answer is yes. I don't believe that the founders ever considered, when they put these in place, that a president would simply ignore them. The checks and balances are only as good as their enforcement and our ability to have them enforced. And the ability is basically zilch right now. So while I don't like to accept that this is the reality, Landon's right, that the one way, the one opportunity to give Trump a consequence, like a parent would tell their kid, if you do this, you're going to have a consequence. The only opportunity is voting Trump out in November of 2020. If he's reelected, there will be no other consequences during his second term, and he will serve that second term and then leave. He's not going to be indicted after he leaves the White House. Forget that if people are holding out hope for that. There's one opportunity, and it's simply saying at the ballot box, we reject you. We reject you by such overwhelming numbers that even foreign interference and voting machine nonsense and all of the stuff and purging voter rolls, we reject you by such overwhelming numbers that even those things can't keep you in the Oval Office. It's one opportunity. Landon's right. It's a sad reality, but that's the reality we're dealing with. We are going to talk on the bonus show today about the black Texas teen who was told to cut his hair, his dreadlocks, in order to walk at graduation. What is all that about? Many people outraged. We will also talk about new research where it appears as though we figured out why stress turns people's hair gray. Okay, we will discuss that. And in addition to that, New Jersey is mandating severance pay for workers facing mass layoffs. And that in and of itself is triggering a lot of people who I guess don't think that the workers deserve severance pay. All of those stories and more on today's bonus show. Become a member at joinpacman.com to get instant access. The impeachment coupon code is IMPEACH50. We are at 103 new members using the IMPEACH50 coupon code. Help us make it 104. We will also be continuing our endless marathon streams of the impeachment trial of Donald Trump. If you're listening to this, we are probably streaming right now. Come find us on YouTube and Twitch. We will otherwise talk to you on the bonus show or on tomorrow's program.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.